Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the Lian Li 011D XL, a ROG certified PC gaming case that's absolutely magnificent. This is an unboxing video and setup and installation video that will show you the process of setup as well as all the different highlights to the case that include, as you can see, the ability to mount up to three 360mm radiators, one on the side, top and bottom, as well as a fan at the rear if you so choose. I haven't got one installed at the moment, but I'm probably going to add that in later on. And it also has a number of other really cool features to it, as well as vertical GPU mounting. You have the ability to install 4 hot swappable standard platter hard drives in the rear, up to 6 2.5-inch SSD drives in it as well if you so choose, and a setup that includes even the largest of E-ATX motherboards. You can also mount a mass of liquid cooling devices inside this, so you can have a really cool liquid cooled setup in here too if you want to, and it comes with all sorts of other nice things. Now, I'm upgrading from the Corsair Crystal 680X case, which I was a big fan of, and this one is an improvement on that in my mind for a couple of different reasons. First of which is the number of tempered glass panels means you can see into the case a lot easier. It's a real monster in terms of display. It also has a lot more fan potential. As you'll see, I've installed an insane number of fans in here. There were actually some that you couldn't even see in that initial video that I will show you. As well, it also has a really nice multiple USB port connection options on the front panel as well. I'll talk to you about as I go through. I'll include all the specifications in the description, as well as a link to the official page and where to buy it from. But as you can see, there are plenty of things of interest going on with this case. You'll note here, for example, these bays at the top that you can unscrew on the left hand side. That's where the hard drives sit, but you can actually remove those hard drive bays and install multiple power supply units stacked on top of each other if you so choose, which means you could work some magic potentially and install a couple of different PC setups within it, or do all sorts of other mad things. It fits up to extended E-ATX motherboards in it, or you can write down to ITX as well, so you have a variety of options. Here you can see there's a vertical GPU mount as well, so you can do that and witness the glory of the graphics card through the side panel, or through that tempered glass goodness, and that gives you plenty of options. There's also a mass of other ports. Underneath you have a classic and very nice mesh tray to protect from dust, and then also has multiple dust linings in it that I'll show you as I go through, that should keep dust out of the case. I'm only in the initial setup process at the moment, so I don't know, I can't tell you how effective that is at keeping dust out. Obviously, if you can see inside, you're going to see a lot of dust if it does pick it up quite quickly. So we'll see how that comes. One of the problems I had with the Crystal 680X actually was that the front panel pulled in a lot of dust very quickly. Now, on the top, you need to remove this top panel first. There's a little button you can see there on the right hand side at the top. You pull that and then unscrew it and pull it off. And there's another dust panel up there, and that's where you can install your 360mm radiator or 320mm fans at the top. And once you've taken that lid off, you can then basically pull all the other panels off. So the tempered glass panels then slide off. They're kept in place with small little hooks that you'll see as I yank them off, and they come off nice and easy. As they come out of the package, they're also got protective film on both sides, which I left on till the end, obviously prevents you from damaging it. Here you can see the little hooks that keep them in place, stop it from just falling apart when you open it up, and also it hooks in at the bottom as well. Those glass panels add some pretty decent heft to this case. It is not a light case by any means. It is quite heavy, but I actually like that. I feel like if you're paying for something decent and you want a good bit of kit, then it's worth getting that bit of heft to it to make it feel nice. As I said, this is a ROG certified case, which means that the front panel connector actually has a RGB connection that will connect to ROG motherboards and plug in to there, and then you can sync up the RGB lighting on the front panel element with your motherboard, which I'll show you a bit later on. The rear panel, as you can see, comes off here. At the back you can see the two hard disk drive bays, and you also have this panel down the middle comes off, and behind that you can see some of your SSDs, and I'll show you. I've installed one there, but you can potentially install multiple SSD drives. This bay at the back holds 4 standard platter hard drives. They're held in place with a little thumb screw. That's hot swappable though, and you'll see it in a minute. Another nifty feature of that is that the cables are included in the drive bays, and therefore all you need to do is plug your drive in and it will automatically be recognised to Windows, and you can take that out while the machine's on and put it in another one if you so wish. You can also take these drive bays out, as I said already, and put in power supply units instead, or just remove them if you're not going to use them and make more room, which is what I've done. I've only got 2 6TB drives in my machine, so I don't really need the extra one. Removing that then gives me space for other things like fan controllers and power cables and that I can then tidy up and keep neat at the back. But the installation of the drives is really easy, and you can customize it too. There is one thing of note actually that I'll note as I quickly go through here that isn't terribly obvious perhaps later on, is that top drive bay does get quite close to the cable management system at the top of the motherboard, which means it's a bit fiddly. So I would recommend actually, if you are going to remove one, to take that top one off, because it gives you a bit more access to sorting out the cables. Inside the box you obviously get a bunch of other things that includes some screws, some small amount of Velcro ties, and some other things. I would recommend purchasing some extra zip ties if you haven't got a load already included with your motherboard or power supply unit or anything else, because there aren't a terrible amount here, and I had to purchase my own extra from Amazon to make up for the lack of them, because there was a lot of cable tidying that needed to happen, especially with the sheer number of fans that I was putting in on this machine. Small gripe, but the other things that you'll see in there is there's spacers for power supply units if you want to install multiple of them, and also mounts that will help you if you're vertically mounting your GPU or if you're SLIing as well. So there's all sorts of things there. You can see you've got screws for the SSD bay, for the power supply mounting, standoff screws for your motherboard, screws to install the motherboard, and more in there as well. So you do get a fair few little bits of kit included in the box. Pretty standard affair. Now on the bottom there is a tray here that you can install 3 fans on, 120mm fans. You can also install a radiator down there, and one of the things that are noted in the specifications on the page is that you'll also find that if you remove the SSD bays from the front side panel that you'll see in a minute, you can actually install them on the bottom if you wanted to. So you could install multiple SSDs at the bottom here. Why you'd want them on display is beyond me, but you can do it if you so choose. Otherwise this fan panel comes out thusly, and then you can just install your fans on it. Now for this build I'm going to be using for the most part Corsair's QL120 fans. I wanted to make the most of the tempered glass, and also I've taken these out of the 680X and purchased another 1 or 2 to add to the setup. And I'm maximising my cooling, so I'm going for intake on the bottom and on the rad for the CPU cooler, and then exhaust on the top. So the bonus of the QL fans, and if you've not seen my video on the QLs already, check that out, I'll link to that in the description. And those essentially have RGB on both sides, which means no matter which way round you mount them, you can then still enjoy the glorious RGB goodness, whether they're mounted forward or backwards, and you can still get all that glory really nicely. So here I am mounting them face down on the fan panel, so they'll then suck in cool air from underneath. And one of the bonuses that you can see from this case is it has some pretty hefty feet to it, so it stands nicely off the desk. or off the floor if you so choose, and therefore it is capable of pulling in a nice amount of cold air easily too. And the benefit obviously of having that much cold air sucked in from the bottom with 3 fans is blowing straight up and into the GPU, anything else that you've got mounted there, and nice bit of airflow through the case. Obviously what airflow you get is going to vary depending on your setup, whether you're installing SSD drives down here or going for some liquid cooling radiators. There is also the option potentially of installing an all-in-one cooler radiator down here too. There's probably a bit more space at the bottom. One of the things you're going to see as I go through this unboxing and installation video is that I had a bit of an issue with the side mounting of the radiator. I'll show you in a minute. I am setting this case up with a push-pull setup using an NZXT Kraken X73 360mm radiator setup, and that led to some problems due to the setup of my motherboard and the size of the motherboard, because I've got an E-ATX MSI Meg Creation X299. If you're interested in the specifications of the machine, I'll include all that in the description so you can see what that's like too. So now I've got those fans installed, it's just a case of popping them in, screwing it back down again, making sure they're secured, and then obviously I have to sort out the cables. Then going for the top mounting of the exhaust fans, so they are facing the other way, sucking the warm air out. I will note there is a slight issue with this one. What I found was I started mounting the fans so that they were right against the edge of the case here, like this, and then once I'd done that I realised there was a bit of a gap between them. I actually ended up having to push them together, and you'll see what I mean in a minute, because when I first started installing them I quickly found that there was a bit of a space between them, and you can see it here. There's a bit of a gap between those two, and then again between the next one. So if you want to keep all your fans nice and close together, you actually have to push them together and end up with space on the sides instead at the very ends. And it's not necessarily an issue, and I figure it's probably because it's designed to hold that radiator at the top as well as another option, so you can install multiple radiators as I said, but you can see the size of the gap there. But if you push all the fans together you then end up with the gap at either end and it doesn't look as bad. And obviously once it's all mounted and you have the dust shield at the top as well, and it doesn't really show off anyway. Here you can see it from various angles as that is, and it's definitely not noticeable and not a major issue. You will note you have multiple places for putting your cables in and keeping things nice and tidy as well, but that top rubberized mount that I was talking about a minute ago, that you can see where that's going to be an issue, because this top drive bay seen here at the rear really gets in the way of that cable management, which is a bit odd. You'll see just how many cables there are around the back as well, and that's one of the downsides to having the multiple front panel connectors. You have 4 standard USB-A connections, the HD audio connections, you've got the RGB, and you've got a USB-C on the front. A nice lot of front panel connections, and certainly an upgrade from the Crystal 680X case that I was using, but it does mean there are loads of connections that need plugging in and more cables that need managing too. And you can see them all close up here. And as I said, the HDD bays also have cables coming out of them because they're hot swappable, so you put your drives into the little bay, slide it in, connect it up, then you have the SATA power and the drive cable connections for your motherboard as well that need organising and plugging in, and obviously that's 2 drives, so you've got both of those there, so you've got multiple cables, and if you keep both bays in you have multiple cables there too. At the bottom of the case you just saw briefly there's a little module that controls the RGB, the lighting connections for that also need to be run through, as well as SATA power, so you've got plenty of things to be powering even before you even started installing your own things. And I've already started with the fans. Here you can see you've got the HDD audio connection for the front panel, as well as a USB-C connection, and then you also have 2 USB cables that need connecting up as well, so you need to make sure you've got enough panels on the front, as well as your hard disk drive, lights, power switch, reset button, all that goodness as well. So now the process going through of installing various things. Here we can see the Corsair RM850X power supply unit. It's a modular power supply unit, makes installation nice. Taking that out of the 680X case that I had, and it's white, so it's a nice fit, perfect fit there. You can actually see as I'm installing this a bit better view. Just in front of that is the little tiny RGB controller that I was talking about a minute ago, and the cables from that basically can be run underneath the rear in the middle and plugged into your motherboard. If you have a rugged motherboard, that's fine. As I said, I've got an MSI motherboard and it's not a problem. You can still connect it up if you've got an RGB connection on it. Only thing is, it's not designed to work with Mystic Light, so you don't have that synchronization between the RGB. So if you're looking to sync up your RGB, then you might like to consider getting ROG motherboard, ROG fans and all that as well. And here we'll just quickly show you the top view of what that panel looks like when it comes off. I had a bit of a fiddle with it because I didn't really realise that button on the rear that you have to press. You press that to unleash the catch. So even though you unscrewed the thumb screws, it's not going anywhere until you press that button. You can press that and then it'll slide off. And it's that top panel that keeps everything in place. I thought you might like to see the top view and just how these panels slide out as well. As you can see, as I said earlier, got little hooks on the glass and they just come off, so there's no danger of everything falling apart once you just remove that top panel, which is nice. And this view also shows you the space you have for building as well. It's a nice machine to build in, plenty of different options. And the setup options means there's a load of different ways to set it up, and it's pretty insane in that way. As I said, you can obviously opt for liquid cooling, and it probably looks the best with that. And you can also choose to install multiple drives if you want to as well, so there's loads of different connection options there. Now into the motherboard installation process, obviously popping in the I/O shield first and then setting it up. As I said, it will fit with multiple motherboards. I'm going for an E-ATX motherboard, but it also supports ATX, M-ATX and ITX, as well as an extended super large E-ATX motherboard. Has a special optional extra for the ROG Dominus Extreme, which is a super large motherboard. There's another option to install. Now, going through very quickly, and I've done a separate video on this if you want to see it in a bit more depth, the installation of the NZXT Kraken X73, a very nice CPU cooler that includes a display with some RGB goodness on it that you can customize to do things like show you the current temperature of your CPU via the colors on the cooler panel itself. It's a 360mm rad as well that you can see here, and you'll note it comes with its own standard fans. Now, for maximum airflow through the case and to keep the radiator as cool as possible, simply because I had the number of fans to make this possible, I wanted to do a push-pull setup on here, so having fans installed on the rear of the radiator to pull air in from outside the case, and then fans on the inside, and that's the Corsair QL120 fans with the RGB, to then carry on pulling as well and assist in that pulling of air across the rad on the inside, so they'll be the ones that will be more visible. And the setup of this might not be necessary for you. You might not choose to do this. You don't have to do it, obviously. It's an extra option, but it's something that I wanted to try and see what the performance was like, and by the way, it's pretty excellent. And I'll link to a video by JZ2cents who covers off what push-pull means and what difference that makes if you're installing a radiator in this way. But here you can see what you need to do to install what I've done, and basically these SSD panels pop off one by one, and you can take those out, and then you have access to be able to install either the SSD drives or a radiator, as I'm choosing to do. And I will note a slight niggle that I had with this that you might see a bit later on is once I've had my radiator installed in here, I actually found there was a gap at the top that I ended up having to make a bit of a bodge fix to sort out. But you can see with the push-pull setup, I've got quite a chunky beast of a radiator sticking out here. So I've got the fans on both sides mounted against the case. I had to screw the screws through the rear of the case into the fans and into the radiator on the rear, and then obviously mount the Corsair fans on the front of it. And it looks really good. It looks really nice like this. I thought maybe a bit chunky, but it still fit nicely in the case and it looked okay. However, I did quickly come across a problem with it when I went to install some of the other cables. You can see I've got a power cable going into the motherboard, and that fits okay. It's kind of a bit tight. Looks kind of neat though. But one of the issues I soon found was that I couldn't get the USB front panel connections through the gap and into my motherboard. Now this is obviously an issue with both the size of my radiator, because I've set up push-pull on it, and also the size of my motherboard. If you had a smaller motherboard, you wouldn't have this issue. But here you can see I'm trying to work that cable through this gap, but then it won't bend to then fit into the connection on the motherboard, and you just can't get the angle on it. So I ended up having to rethink how I'd set up that radiator. I could have ditched the 3 rear fans and just kept the QL fans on it, but I wanted to maximize my airflow and make the most of it. So what I ended up doing was something quite different, and that was basically mounting the radiator behind the case, still with the fans installed on the rear as well. And the highlight of this actually is that it shows just how much space there is at the back, because you are able to do this and still have space for your cables, and I'll show you the cable management in a minute, and keep those fans on the rear as well. So I've installed the standard NZXT fans that come with it on the rear here, and those are installed directly on the radiator. The screws on the QL fans on the front are then what's holding the rad in place, because they're coming through the case and into the radiator. And in doing it this way, it's beneficial in one way, in that it not only frees up space at the front, but it also means that more of my cables are at the rear, because I now have the cables from these 3 fans at the back. And so the result is I can make it look a bit tidier, and also I'm keeping the fans flush to the case. Another benefit that you'll see is the rear panel on the case also has the cooling mesh on it as well, so you have a cutout for cooling intake on there, and you have a dust shield at this position too that you can move around on the rear. Actually, you've got the choice of whether you mount it on the left or the right, but here I'm mounting it on the left, and it fits, and it does fit. So that's quite a surprise that you can fit quite a chunky radiator and those fans at the back without it being squashed completely against that back panel as well. There's still some freedom of movement, there's still space for a multitude of cables, and bearing in mind that I have to install a lot of cables because we've got multiple power connections on my motherboard, 4 power connections on my motherboard, as well as power connections for M2 NVMe expander and GPU running through to the front. I also have multiple QL fans that have 2 cables per fan as well, because they've got power and RGB cables. So, and 2 Plata hard drives, a single 2.5 inch SSD drive. I've got lots of things that need plugging in, so there's loads of cables going on back here, and you can see some of the mess that I had to deal with. Also, setting up the QL fans requires Lighting Node Pros, so I've got 2 of those installed, as well as the Commander Pro, and I've done a video separately that I'll link to that talks to you about how to set those up if you're interested in it. I did that in the Crystal 680X, but basically what you're doing is setting up the RGB to be controlled by the Lighting Node Pros, and then the Commander Pro does some of the power for some of the fans. And I probably could have done with another fan controller, and this is something worth bearing in mind, is the sheer number of fans that you can install in this case. You might want another fan controller. I probably could have done with another Commander Pro, for example. If I'd have done that, I could have put all the fans through the Commander Pro for control purposes. However, you do need to then think about how many USB headers you have on your motherboard, because I ended up using several of those quite quickly. The Commander Pro takes one of them. The connection from the NZXT cooler. That has a USB connection as well that you can see here. That's plugged in underneath, and I'll go through in a bit more depth in that video on the cooler, on the Kraken cooler, the ups and downs of that. But you could opt for NZXT's RGB fans and use their fan controller instead. But again, you need to think about how many fans you're going to put in, whether you're having RGB, and just how many USB headers you have on your motherboard and how you're going to set that up. Because I actually ended up running the lighting mode pros into the Commander Pro, and then that into the motherboard via USB. So here you have it, the end result. Very nice looking case, but you can see at the top of the radiator my sneaky little design. At the top there is a gap normally, which I have filled sneakily with the panels that I've taken out from my GPU and the M2 expander, and I've put those at the back because otherwise there's a gaping hole in the way I've set this up. Now obviously the way I've done this is fairly unusual to have that push-pull set up anyway. You might not choose to do that, you might go for liquid cooling, or you might just have the 3 fans instead, so you might not need to do what I've done. But I found when I mounted it this way I needed to take out all the panels at the rear, and it ended up with this gap at the top, but that wasn't quite big enough to fill with the standard SSD drive bay connections, so it ended up with this horrible looking gap that I've then filled in essentially, which you might not like and it might niggle at you, but I think it looks alright in the end. And then the end result is a very nice machine that you can see from multiple angles. It's hard, I don't think I'm really doing it that much justice with this video, unfortunately. It looks even nicer, and obviously RGB goodness. I've opted for blue across all the fans and my RAM and that. But it's also worth showing here, you can see that RGB strip down the front as well, and I'll show that in action in a second, because that RGB strip can be changed not only in colour but also in various schemes. And you see that M and C button just below the USB-C connection, the bottom buttons on this front panel connection. You can press those and you can change the colours, so you can change the patterns it goes through or go for static solid colours. So I've got a blue to match the rest of my fan setup. The ROG certified sticker on the front here, that's kind of thin, etchy design. It's not etched into the glass, but I've left it on even though I don't have anything ROG in my machine, because I feel like if I tried to peel that off it would end up being pretty messy, so I've actually ended up leaving that. You can see the front panel has this nice brushed aluminium finish to it, and the multiple USB connections. You've got 2 USB connections at the bottom, and then you have USB-C, front panel audio, HD audio, and 2 more USB connections, as well as the reset and power button. One problem I probably will note with this that you'll see, and it's going to vary depending on whether it's an issue for you or not, with the Crystal 680X case that I had before, you could open the door and have easy access to your machine. On my Meg Creation motherboard, there's a dial that you can roll to adjust the overclocking on the fly without going into the software or the BIOS. You can't access this from this case without taking off the front panel and then the side panel. So there's no easy access if you want to get into your case quickly and easily. However, I do feel like that probably is going to be beneficial in a number of ways, in that it's sealed up a bit tighter than the 680X, and in terms of dust intake you're probably going to find less dust and dirt getting into the machine as well. So now a close-up view of that RGB strip on the front. As I said, you have the choice to either press this C button and go between the static colours, and you have a variety of different colours to choose from, or pressing M for some different mood lighting that includes the usual sort of effects like rainbow and such. But as I said, this is ROG certified, so if you connect this up to an Asus ROG motherboard, you can press that button and then it will change the lighting and sync it with the lighting on your motherboard too, if that's your bag. For me it doesn't really matter because I can just set it to the static colour and then have it just looking nice anyway. A slightly different angle. You can see it's not too offensive, it's quite a small highlight to the case. Well, I think it's a nice touch, and it really sets it off, especially with all the other RGB fans that I've already got installed in the case anyway. If you didn't have any RGB fans, it might look a bit out of place, but if you've got some nice RGB fans and some nice liquid cooling, it looks pretty magnificent. I think I've covered everything that I could possibly cover, although you can see just how interesting this case is. The fact that you can install multiple power supply units in it, the way you can set it up with multiple different fans with liquid cooling. You can install a mass of SSD drives as well, plenty of storage options, the hot swappable bays. It's all really interesting. It's a really nice machine to put together. Has a number of quirks to it, but the end result is a fantastic bit of kit that's a real joy to have on the desk. Hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting or hilarious. Be sure to subscribe and check out these other videos, as well as taking a look in the description for links and other information you might find useful. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or anything you'd like to see extra about this, and have a great life.